The other question, yes, the U.S. The recommendations from the interagency working group just came out last week, and we have yet to review it. And clearly, it's many, as you know, many of the companies that are participating in Canada are also participating in the U.S. initiative and also in the European initiative. So, we're going to certainly have to closely look at the recommendations from the U.S. It's a very, I only read it very quickly, and from what I could tell, it seemed to be quite an ambitious sodium reduction strategy, and I think their phase-in, what they're recommending for phase-in, is quite lengthy too, because while we all like to change, reformulate products as quickly as possible, it's not a fast process. So, but as I said, we definitely will have to be studying it and looking at it and see what what if any effects it'll have and any changes that we'll have to make to our program. We made some changes this past year in terms of extending the media, so we're always looking at ways to improve it. But I think that was it from, oh yes, the rest is yours.
Okay, I'm trying to think which I'll start with. Maybe I'll talk about the leaky border issue first. The woman who mentioned about how TV comes from all over the place, and so in this world we call this the leaky border of advertising, because so it's a policy on inside one border, and because the policy doesn't exist next door, the kids aren't protected from the policy within that jurisdiction. And so what we found in our research was that when we just looked at kids' preferred viewing, and this is with 10 to 12-year-olds, none of their preferred viewing programs came from the United States. If we'd maybe, because we were looking at the 30 preferred hours for those three groups, maybe if we'd gone to 60 hours, we probably would have gotten some American television in that. But in our 30 hours, it was all Canadian television. So for their favorite shows, those are shows that are coming off Canadian networks. So where we found the leakiest border was between Ontario and Quebec. So it wasn't the Canadian-American border, and it's because the policy obviously is much stronger in Quebec than in Ontario, and that's why the English Quebecers aren't being protected. And when I say English Quebecers, it's kids that are watching TV in English. I know the Quebec government has said that they feel that the Consumer Protection Act applies to everything that's broadcast in Quebec, but that hasn't been tested in a court of law yet. So, so we don't know that for sure. So, in terms of product placement, the Children's Food and Beverage Advertising Initiative has committed, and Janet can certainly speak to this, has committed to not look for product placement possibilities, basically. And so that's something, but there's no research in Canada right now that has evaluated that has looked at that, et cetera, though I'm sure that's part of your assessment that you do.
Yeah,
so.
it is. It is part of our assessment. Every year we do check, and we've not found any product placement. Sometimes we, if we do see something that we might think is product placement, we will call and check with the companies, but no, we have not found any. And one comment I wanted to make, I'm not going to be here later on, but there's no question that there's a porous border, and that kids are exposed to advertising and media influences from internet, whether it's teenagers or children or internet, and you can't always be there holding their hand and making sure that when they get older anyway, they're not going to be sure what they're watching, what they're seeing in the videos and online worlds, and it can be harmful. So that's why I know you're going to be talking later on about media literacy, and I think that it plays a big role, because it'll teach children to be careful and deconstruct the media and advertising, and pay attention to what's appropriate and what's not.
I wanted to also comment about the new standards that came out in the United States. it goes back to the point that I was mentioning, that healthy foods has to be defined so carefully. The US right now is proposing that saturated fat be placed at 15% of the product in terms of energy, which is actually quite high. Typically the level for saturated fat is 10%. Also, they've decided to set sugar at 25%, or at least they're proposing that. And again, the WHO recommends 10%. So, you know, the way we define healthy foods is very, very important in terms of protecting our children. The last comment I wanted to make was about the food and beverage advertisements that are directed at adults. There was a question about that rather than children. And so, as I said, if you remember from the slide, what we found was that 30% of the ads in the French Quebec sample were directed to children. Now, I'd say 50% of that 30%, so half of those ads, the reason that they were there was because of the monitoring system in Quebec, because it's not a systematic monitoring system. There's no one sitting watching TV all day somewhere in the government of Quebec saying, oh, that one is against the law, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, so part of that is a monitoring problem. The other part of that is that some of the hours we were looking at were not hours that are included in the hours that the Consumer Protection Act concerns itself with. So their hours, they have a little bit of time kind of in the morning, Monday to Friday, and then their big focus is the afternoon hours from, I think it goes from 3 or 3:30 till about 6 o'clock at night. But what we're seeing is that kids, at least 10 to 12-year-olds, are really watching TV later into the evening, and certainly big viewing time between 7 and 9 o'clock at night. That's big viewing time for that age group, even up to 10 o'clock on weekdays. So, and yes, so the 70% of ads that's directed at adults, that's food and beverage related. That's like the slide I showed with the McDonald's ad that's directed at parents. So that type of ad, we don't have research that shows whether the impact of that type of ad versus, say, the Happy Meal ad. What's the impact on a child? Well, we don't have research on whether, you know, one has more of an impact than the other. I would guess that the Happy Meal ad would probably have a bit more of an impact on the child because it's directed to the child. But that's not to say that the McDonald's ad with the adult in it is not having an impact, because you're still getting the branding message. And especially when ads are directed at teens and a younger child sees that, I mean, what younger child doesn't want to be like a 13 or a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old? So even though it's not directed at the child, it's still going to have an influence on them. That's it.